In a ballroom under a crystal chandelier, a 5-year-old heiress exposed her family's deepest secret with a single word. Eomma, Mom. But she wasn't calling to the woman in the diamond necklace. She was running, arms outstretched, toward the black gardener kneeling in the soil. And in that silent, shattered moment, $1 billion fortune, a legacy, and the very definition of family hung in the balance. This is the story of Su-Min Kang, the 5-year-old daughter of tech billionaire Jun Kang, and the woman she called mother, Adana Oak, a Nigerian-born horticulturist hired to shape the estate's gardens, not its air. For 3 years, their bond flourished in secret, a quiet defiance of every social rule in that world. But when a child's love shattered the silence of a gala, it ignited a firestorm. Now we must ask, what is the true cost of a family built across the lines of blood, race, and class? And who gets to decide what that family is allowed to be? 3 years before the gala, Jun Kang stood in a sole adoption agency, holding a document that would shape his entire world. He was 38, a self-made billionaire from a single algorithm that predicted consumer behavior, and utterly alone. His parents were gone. His marriage had dissolved over his obsession with work. The adoption of Su-Min, then a 2-year-old girl from Incheon, wasn't an act of charity. It was a desperate, silent prayer for a family. He brought her home to a 30-room estate in Yongin, a palace of glass and silence. He hired a nanny, a chef, a driver. He gave her everything except the one thing she needed most, a parent who wasn't terrified of getting it wrong. Meanwhile, 6,000 miles away in Lagos, Adana Oak was packing her own single suitcase. 29, a botanist with a degree from the University of Ibadan in hands that could make anything grow. She had spent years restoring neglected urban gardens, but her visa to a prestigious horticulture fellowship in Singapore had fallen through. The job listing for the Kang estate was a lifeline: head gardener, live-in position, visa sponsorship. It said nothing about a child. She arrived in the deep cold of a Korean February. The estate was a stark masterpiece of modern design, all sharp angles and reflecting pools. Her domain was the 7-acre grounds, a landscape that had been meticulously controlled into submission. Her first task was to revive the walled kitchen garden, a frozen patch of dormant earth. On her 3rd day, kneeling in the brittle soil, she felt a presence. A small girl in a thick pink coat stood at the edge of the path, silent, watching with dark, serious eyes. Su-Min. The nanny, Ms. Park, was never far, but she was a woman of schedules and sanitized hands. Adana simply went back to work, digging, her breath fogging in the air. She didn't coax, she didn't perform. After 20 minutes, Su-Min took one step off the path, then another. She stopped beside a bed of dormant lavender. "Sleeping?" the little girl asked in Korean, pointing. Adana, who had been studying basic phrases, understood. "Yes," she said slowly in her own language. "Sleeping." But waiting, she patted the earth, like a secret. That was the beginning. No grand declaration, just a silent agreement made in a frozen garden. Su-Min began to appear every afternoon. Adana would give her simple, pointless tasks. Hold these seeds, pat this soil. The nanny disapproved, but June, who saw his daughter finally calm and engaged from his office window, allowed it. What he didn't see was the language that bloomed between them. Adana spoke to her in a mix of English and simple Igbo, the language of her grandmother. Su-Min responded in Korean. They didn't always understand the words, but they always understood the meaning. The meaning was, "You are safe here." The first time Su-Min called her Eomma, it was an accident born of a skinned knee. She had tripped on a garden stone, and the word tumbled out in a gasp of pain and surprise. Adana froze, her heart a drum in her chest. She cleaned the cut, placed a bandage, and said nothing. But the word hung in the air between them, a forbidden truth. After that, it was only ever used in the sanctuary of the gardens, away from the house, away from the world. It was their secret. Adana knew the boundaries. She was an employee. She signed a contract that mentioned confidentiality and professional conduct. But how do you contract a heart? She began planting flowers from Nigerian folklore. Yellow alamanda for resilience, purple bougainvillea for welcome. She told Su-Min stories of Anansi the spider, stories her own mother had told her, translating them into a clumsy patchwork of languages. She taught her how to press petals between books. This was the active cultural socialization experts laud, but here it wasn't a strategy. It was one woman giving a child the scattered pieces of her own soul, so the child might feel less scattered herself. June Kang was oblivious, but he was not blind. He noticed the dirt on his daughter's dresses and the new, unfamiliar light in her eyes. He found strange, beautiful rocks on his desk, left there by a small hand. His daughter, who had been so quiet, began to ask questions. Why do leaves fall? Where is Nigeria? He, the man who had built an empire on answering questions, fumbled for answers. A slow, cold realization began to dawn. His daughter was being shaped by someone else. He felt a confusing knot of gratitude and resentment. He decided to meet the gardener. Their first real conversation was by the new rose arbor Adana had built. He was all crisp lines and guarded questions. She was soil-stained and direct. She's a bright child, Adana said. She needs more than toys. June felt accused. She has everything. Adana looked at him, not with defiance, but with a devastating pity. Does she? She went back to pruning. June stood there, the billionaire in his own garden, dismissed by the help. That night, he reviewed the security camera feeds from the grounds. Not for an hour, for 3. He watched the silent, easy communion between his daughter and this stranger. He saw Sumin laugh at something, her whole body shaking with it, a laugh he had never triggered. He closed the feed. He didn't know what he was watching, but it felt like a verdict. The pressure began to build from the outside. June's social circle, the old money families and corporate titans, had expectations. His daughter was approaching school age. Questions were asked. Where was the mother? When would he remarry? A suitable, cultured Korean mother, of course. His board members made gentle suggestions. The image of a stable, traditional family was good for business. The unspoken truth hung in the air. A single billionaire father with a transracially adopted daughter was already a curiosity. That daughter being primarily attached to a black foreign worker was a scandal waiting to happen. Adana felt the walls closing in. The nanny's disapproving stares grew longer. The house manager began auditing her hours. She knew her position and her visa were fragile things. She tried to pull back, to make herself smaller, to be just the gardener. But you cannot unscramble an egg. You cannot unlove a child. Sumin would find her, a small, determined shadow, and take her hand. The bond had become a fact of nature, as real and undeniable as the roots beneath their feet. Then came the invitation, the Seoul National Art Gallery Gala, the most exclusive event of the season. June was to be honored. Attendance was mandatory. Families are encouraged, the invite read. He decided Sumin would come. It was time to present her to the world. He ordered a custom pink tulle dress. He hired an etiquette coach for her. He also, almost as an afterthought, instructed that Adana be asked to attend as supplemental staff to oversee the floral arrangements for the evening. It was a practical decision. She knew the plants. What he didn't foresee was that for Sumin, the gala wasn't a debut. It was simply a new place where her mother would be. The night arrived. The ballroom was a galaxy of crystal and silk. Sumin, a tiny, rigid figure in her pink dress, held her father's hand, overwhelmed by the noise and the staring eyes. Her gaze scanned the crowd, not for approval but for a familiar face. She found Adana across the room, kneeling by a vast arrangement of orchids, adjusting a leaf. In that moment, the coaching, the fear, the entire performance shattered. The child saw only her sanctuary in a sea of strangers. She broke from her father's grip. The crowd parted, and she ran, her small voice cutting through the murmur of champagne flutes, calling out for the one real thing she knew in all that glittering fake world. The word landed, Eomma. The silence was absolute. Every eye turned to June Kang to see what the billionaire would do. His face was a mask of utter shock, but his gaze wasn't on his daughter. It was locked on Adana Oak, kneeling in her work clothes as the child reached her. And in Adana's eyes, as she caught Sumin in her arms, there was no fear, no apology. There was only a love so raw and defiant that it told the entire room the truth. The secret was out. And in that explosive silence, a single thought echoed in June's mind, a thought that would trigger a war for his daughter's future. I have lost her. The silence in the ballroom lasted only 3 seconds before it was replaced by a sound far worse, a rising wave of whispers. June Kang's mind, usually a supercomputer of risk assessment and damage control, went blank. He saw the shattered pieces of his carefully constructed world, the shocked faces of his investors, the arched eyebrows of society matrons, the discreet phones already raised to capture the scene. His daughter was clinging to the gardener's neck, her face buried as Adana slowly, deliberately stood up, holding the child, soil-stained glove stark against the pink tool. He moved on instinct, not thought. In 5 long strides, he was across the marble floor. He didn't speak to Adana. He didn't look at her. He simply reached for his daughter. "Sumin, come." His voice was a low, strained command. The child tightened her grip, shaking her head against Adana's shoulder. A fresh, louder murmur went through the crowd. The billionaire was being defied by his own daughter in front of everyone. June's hand closed around Sumin's arm. It was not a gentle grip. Now. Adana's eyes met his then. In them he didn't see the apology of an employee. He saw the fierce, protective glare of a mother, but she was pragmatic. She knew the power dynamic here was absolute. She whispered something into Sumin's ear in Igbo, then gently loosened the child's arms. "Go to your father, *NWAM*, she said softly. "My child." Sumin went limp, allowing June to lift her. Her body was rigid, her face a mask of silent betrayal. He turned, carrying her away from Adana back through the parting crowd, a retreat that felt like a defeat. He instructed his driver to take Sumin home immediately with the nanny. Then he turned to his publicist, who had materialized at his elbow, face pale. "Contain it," June said, his voice like ice. "No photos leave this room." Any media outlet that runs the story finds their advertising contract with Kang Ventures terminated tomorrow. But you cannot contain a story that lives in the memories of 200 eyewitnesses. By the next morning, it was the only topic in every corporate lounge and high society chat room in Seoul. The details mutated with each retelling. The gardener was a nanny. She was a maid. She was a relative from some obscure branch of the family. The one constant was the word, Eomma *. The child had called the help mom. The consensus was a mixture of scandalized delight and genuine concern. What was wrong in that house? In the sterile quiet of his home office, June faced the first institutional consequence. A board member, Mr. Cho, a man from an old family who valued tradition above algorithms, called. His tone was polite, deadly. "Juna, this situation with the child, it's unfortunate. The media narrative, it's bad for stability. Investors like stability. They like normalcy." The message was clear. The eccentric single father was one thing. The father whose child was emotionally attached to a foreign laborer was a liability. June's response was to seize absolute control. He summoned Adana to his office at 7 a.m. She arrived, still in her practical work clothes, her face calm but her hands clenched at her sides. He did not offer her a seat. "Your employment is terminated," he said, the words landing like stones. "Effective immediately. You will be paid a severance of 3 months' salary. Your visa sponsorship is revoked. You have 48 hours to vacate the staff quarters." Adana didn't flinch, and Sumin. "Is none of your concern. You overstepped profoundly." "I cared for a child who was seeking care," she said, her voice steady. "I did not overstep. I showed up where there was an absence." Her calm defiance enraged him. "You confused her. You inserted yourself into a family structure that is not yours. Do you have any idea what you've done? The damage." For the first time, her composure cracked, not into fear, but into a flash of raw anger. The damage. The damage was a little girl who didn't speak to anyone, who flinched at loud noises, who didn't know how to play. I did not damage her. I found her, and she found me. What damage have you done, Mr. Kang, by being too busy to be her father? The air left the room. No one spoke to him like this. He stood up, leaning across the desk. "Get out." If you attempt to contact my daughter, I will have you arrested for trespassing and deported." Adana left, but she didn't go to her room to pack. She went to the walled garden. She sat on the stone bench where she and Sumin had spent hundreds of afternoons, and she let herself cry just once for the cruel absurdity of it all. Love was not a valid reason. It was a fireable offense. Upstairs, the real war began. Sumin refused to speak. She refused to eat. She sat by the window in her room, staring down at the gardens. The nanny, Ms. Park, reported that the child would not respond to Korean. She would only react to Igbo words of which Ms. Park knew none. June, desperate, tried to engage her with new, expensive toys. They lay untouched. He read her books in Korean. She turned her head away. The child was not throwing a tantrum. She was in mourning. She had lost her primary attachment figure, and her world had collapsed. This was the psychological reality the research warned about, the trauma of abrupt separation, manifesting in a tiny, stubborn body. 4 days after the gala, the first news item appeared. Not in a major paper, but in a slick online gossip portal. The headline was brutal: "Billionaire, orphaned heart. Who is the real mother in the Kang mansion?" It featured an anonymously sourced, wildly inaccurate account of the gala, painting Adana as a scheming opportunist who had brainwashed the vulnerable child. The comments section was a cesspool of racism, classism, and armchair diagnosis. June's legal team sent a cease and desist, but the story had already replicated across the digital ecosystem. Pressure mounted from another front. The immigration attorney handling Adana's now revoked sponsorship called June. "Mr. Kang, there is a procedural issue. Ms. Oak entered on an E7 visa specific to skilled horticulture work. Abrupt termination without cause could be viewed negatively by immigration. She could file a complaint for unfair dismissal, which might complicate things." June scoffed. "She's a gardener. I terminated her for inappropriate conduct with my child. That is more than sufficient cause." "Is it?" the lawyer asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Do you have documentation of this misconduct, prior warnings? Or is the misconduct that the child became attached to her?" Family court judges and immigration officers can be surprisingly nuanced about matters of the heart, especially when a child's welfare is involved. A new, chilling variable entered the equation. This wasn't just about public opinion. It was about the law. Adana, if she fought, could tie him up in legal battles, dragging the private shame into public court records. He couldn't allow that. He needed her gone, quickly and quietly. He made a decision. He would offer her money, a significant sum, enough to start over anywhere, in exchange for her signature on a non-disclosure agreement and a voluntary withdrawal of her visa with no complaints filed. He had his head of security, a grim-faced man named Kim, deliver the offer, an envelope containing a cashier's check for a sum that represented a lifetime of wages for a gardener, along with the legal documents. Security Chief Kim found Adana in her nearly empty quarters. He laid the envelope on the bed. "It's the cleanest way," he said, not unkindly. "Take it. Start fresh. This isn't a battle you can win." Adana looked at the check. The number was astronomical. It could bring clean water to her grandmother's village. It could fund 100 community gardens. It was everything she had ever needed except for the one thing she wanted. She picked up the pen. She looked at the NDA, which stated she would never speak of her time at the Kang estate, never attempt to contact Sumin, never dispute the terms of her departure. She thought of Sumin's face at the window, searching for her. She put the pen down. "No." Chief Kim was stunned. "You're refusing." "I am," she said. "Tell Mr. Kang he does not get to pay to erase what happened. He does not get to buy my silence about his daughter. If he wants me to leave, he will have to force me, and the world will see him do it." When Kim reported back, June felt a surge of pure, incandescent fury. Who was this woman? What gave her this power? He was a man who moved markets, and he was being held hostage by a gardener with a moral compass. He ordered Kim to have her physically removed from the property the next morning. "Call the local police if you need to," June said. Tell them she's a disgruntled ex-employee refusing to leave. That night the pivot came. It arrived not from Adana but from the most unexpected place, his own home security system. Unable to sleep, June paced his study. On a whim, he pulled up the archived camera feeds from the gardens, not from the recent tense days but from months ago. He selected a random afternoon. The timestamp read October 12th, 4 p.m. On screen, he saw his daughter. She was maybe 4 years old. She was sitting on the grass, her back to the camera, shoulders hunched. She was crying, a silent, shaking cry he remembered, the kind she had when she first arrived, overwhelmed by the new world. Then Adana walked into the frame. She didn't swoop in. She sat down a few feet away, her own back to a tree. She didn't look at Soo-min. She began to speak, her voice a low murmur picked up by the sensitive audio. She was telling a story. Not in perfect Korean, but in a melodic blend of English and another language. And the spider, Anansi, he was not the biggest or the strongest, Adana's voice said, soft and rhythmic. But he was the cleverest. He knew that strength is not always in the muscles. Sometimes it is in the web you weave, in the connections you make. As she spoke, Soo-min's crying slowed. Her head tilted, listening. After a few minutes, she scooched backwards, not turning until her small back was resting against Adana's side. Adana didn't stop the story. She didn't put an arm around her. She just kept talking, becoming a solid, warm presence to lean against. By the end of the story, Soo-min was asleep, her head lolling against Adana's arm. Adana sat there, unmoving, for another 20 minutes, letting the child rest, before carefully gathering her up and carrying her toward the house. June watched, his breath caught in his throat. He had never seen that moment. He had been in a board meeting in Tokyo. This was the unobserved, uncurated truth. This was not confusion. This was therapy. This was the active, patient building of security that he, in all his wealth, had failed to provide. He felt a seismic crack in his certainty. What if he was wrong? What if the threat was Adana's presence but her removal? He closed the feed, his hands trembling. He had given the order for her removal at 8 a.m. It was now 5. He had 3 hours before the scene he had just witnessed in reverse would play out in real life. Not a child being comforted, but a woman being dragged away, on his orders, for the crime of providing comfort. And his daughter would be watching from that same window. He picked up his phone to call off Chief Kim, but before he could dial, a new alert flashed on his screen, a breaking news notification. The gossip portal had just published a follow-up. This time they had a named source. They had a photograph. The headline turned his blood to ice. Exclusive, the gardener's story. Adana Oak speaks. I am the only mother she has ever known. June clicked the link and the world tilted. The article wasn't gossip. It was a manifesto. It featured direct, lengthy quotes from Adana, given not to a reporter but to a human rights lawyer who had posted them online. She spoke of Soo-min's early silence, of nights spent reading in the garden shed because the child was afraid of the dark mansion, of teaching her Igbo lullabies. She called me Eomma, not because I told her to, but because she had no other word for what I was to her. The one who showed up. The piece was framed not as a scandal, but as a case study in attachment and loss. It included a damning line. Mr. Kang offered me money to disappear and to never speak of his daughter again. I refused. Love is not a secret to be sold. The public dam broke. The narrative flipped overnight. The cold, controlling billionaire versus the compassionate caregiver. Hashtags bloomed. Let her stay, justice for Adana. A petition demanding her visa be reinstated garnered 50,000 signatures in 12 hours. News vans, which had been kept at the estate's gate, now camped there. For the first time, June Kang was not in control of his own story. Inside the house, a more urgent crisis unfolded. Soo-min's silent protest had become medical. She stopped drinking water. By the afternoon of the article's release, the family pediatrician was summoned. The diagnosis was severe, psychogenic failure to thrive. She is grieving, Mr. Kang. Children can literally will themselves to stop living if they feel a core attachment has been severed. The solution was non-negotiable. She needs to be reunited with her primary attachment figure. immediately, or we are looking at hospitalization for tube feeding. June stood in his daughter's room watching the small, listless form in the bed. The doctor's words echoed, primary attachment figure asterisk. Not father, not nanny, the gardener. The legal reality he had been trying to suppress now rose with terrible clarity. In the eyes of child psychology, and potentially in the eyes of a family court, Adana Oak held a position of immense power. She was the psychological parent, and he had just proven himself capable of inflicting profound emotional harm on his child by removing her. He made the call to Chief Kim. Stand down, do not remove her. Then he did the hardest thing he had ever done. He walked to the staff quarters and knocked on Adana's door. She opened it expecting security. Seeing him, her expression hardened into defensive stone. He spoke first, the words ash in his mouth. She's sick. The doctor says it's because you're gone. She won't drink. Adana's stance changed in an instant. The defensiveness vanished, replaced by pure, undiluted fear for the child. Where is she? She's in her room, will you come? She was already moving past him, down the hall, not waiting for permission. June followed, a supplicant in his own home. The moment Sumin saw Adana in the doorway, a sound escaped her, a weak, raspy whimper. Adana crossed the room in 3 strides, gathering the child up, murmuring in Igbo. She reached for the glass of water on the bedside table. Drink *NWAM* for me. Sumin took a small sip, then another, her eyes locked on Adana's face as if drinking her in too. The relief in the room was physical. June felt like an intruder. He cleared his throat. What does she need? Adana didn't look at him. She needs consistency. She needs to know I'm not going to vanish because you're angry. She needs to feel safe. How do we do that? Now she looked at him, her gaze direct. You reinstate my position, not as a gardener, as Sumin's dedicated caregiver, with a formal contract that guarantees my presence for a minimum of 1 year, regardless of your whims. You publicly retract your accusations, and you instruct your lawyers to cooperate fully with my immigration attorney to secure my permanent residency. Not a sponsored visa, residency, because I am not temporary to her. It was a complete surrender of his authority. He knew it. He also knew the doctor was right. He nodded, a single stiff motion. Done. But the world outside did not stop for their private truce. The board of Kang Ventures called an emergency meeting. June attended via video from his study, Adana's contract draft on his desk. Mr. Cho, the traditionalist, spoke for the group. June, the company's brand is built on stability, on traditional family values. This spectacle is catastrophic. The stock is down 7%. We are recommending you take a leave of absence until the situation is resolved. Resolved how? June asked, his voice flat. However you must, but the image of our CEO being dictated to by a domestic employee, it cannot stand. Make her go away. Quietly, legally, but make her go. June looked at their faces on the screen, a grid of judgment. He thought of Sumin drinking water because Adana asked her to. He made a decision. No. The board was stunned into silence. No. My daughter's well-being is not negotiable. The caregiver stays. I will not force her out. Then the board will have no choice but to consider a vote of no confidence, Mr. Cho said, his voice icy. You are choosing one child over the stability of a company that employs thousands. I am choosing my child over your idea of stability, June replied, and ended the call. He was now at war on 2 fronts, the court of public opinion and his own boardroom. He instructed his publicist to draft a statement, acknowledging Adana's role and her reinstatement. It was a calculated risk to reclaim the narrative, but before it could be released, the wait, it gets worse, moment hit. A whistleblower from within Kang Ventures, Human Resources Department contacted a major newspaper. They provided documents showing a pattern of practice. The company had a history of sponsoring visas for skilled foreign workers, only to terminate them abruptly under dubious pretenses, leaving them vulnerable to deportation. Adana's case was not an anomaly, it was a pattern. The headline was a sledgehammer. Kang Ventures two-tier system. Billionaire's family drama exposes company-wide exploitation. The story connected the personal to the systemic. June wasn't just a flawed father, he was the face of a corrupt corporate culture. Protesters at his gate now held signs about labor rights. Politicians began making statements. A government audit of Kang Ventures' hearing practices was announced. Then the final devastating pivot. A reporter digging into Adana's background found what June's own security team had missed. They located Sumin's biological grandmother in Incheon. The woman, Mrs. Lee, poor and ailing, had been searching for her granddaughter for years, having been told the adoption was closed and she had no rights. She gave a tearful interview. "I only wanted to know she was safe. I didn't know she was with a billionaire. I didn't know she had a new mother who wasn't even Korean." The question was now explosive. Did June Kang's wealth and influence grease the wheels of an adoption that severed a child not just from one culture, but from her remaining biological family? The story was now a triptych of outrage, class warfare, labor exploitation, and ethical adoption. June's past was being picked apart. The board panicked completely, scheduling a vote to remove him as CEO in 48 hours. In the eye of this hurricane, the estate was an island of fragile calm. Adana's presence had stabilized Sumin. The child ate, she played quietly in the garden, she slept clutching Adana's scarf. But Adana watched the news with dread. She understood that June's power, the very power that protected her and Sumin for now, was crumbling. June found her in the kitchen late one night making tea. "You've seen," he stated. "I've seen," she said. "They are going to destroy you. They're going to try. And if they succeed, what happens to my residency? What happens to Sumin's stability?" Her voice was low, urgent. "You made a promise based on power you no longer have." He looked exhausted, hollowed out. "I know." A strange solidarity formed in that moment. They were no longer employer and employee, nor rivals for a child's love. They were two adults in a lifeboat, watching the ship burn. "There's only one way out," Adana said quietly. "You have to get in front of it, all of it. You have to tell the whole truth before they define it for you." "You mean a press conference?" he said. "I mean a reckoning," she replied. "You have to acknowledge what I am to her. You have to acknowledge what your company did. You have to address the adoption. You have to do it with me and Sumin's grandmother by your side. You have to be human, not a billionaire." It was a complete strategic surrender. It would invite every demon in. It would likely cost him his company. He looked toward the hallway leading to his daughter's room. He thought of the video feed of the small child leaning against Adana, finally at peace. He had built an empire on predicting outcomes. The outcome of this path was ruin, but the outcome of the other path was losing his daughter forever. He took a deep breath, set it up. The next 36 hours were a blur of lawyers, PR crisis managers, and difficult conversations. June spoke to Mrs. Lee, the biological grandmother, and offered not just an apology, but an open line of communication and financial support. He met with the whistleblower from HR and pledged a full, independent review. He signed over temporary control of his voting shares to a neutral trustee to appease the board, effectively neutering himself. And he prepared to face the world. The press conference was set for 10 a.m. at the Seoul Press Center. The room was packed, buzzing with anticipation. June stood backstage, his notes in his hand. Adana stood beside him, holding a sleepy Sumin. Mrs. Lee stood on his other side, nervous but resolute. They were a tableau of the fractured, modern family he had inadvertently built. "This is the point of no return," his publicist whispered. "After this, there's no going back to the old world." June looked at his daughter, who reached out and touched his cheek, a rare, gentle gesture. He looked at Adana, who gave him a single, steady nod. He straightened his tie, a man about to jump off a cliff. "Then let's go build a new one," he said, and walked out into the blinding flash of 100 cameras. The flashbulbs erupted as June Kang stepped to the microphone, a billionaire alone in a storm of his own making. He did not read from his notes. He looked at the sea of faces and began to speak, his voice uncharacteristically quiet, forcing the room to strain to hear. 3 years ago, I adopted a daughter because I was lonely. I thought giving her a home like this, he gestured vaguely, indicating the world of wealth he came from, would be enough. I was wrong. What she needed was not a palace. It was a person. That person is Adana Oak. He turned slightly, inviting the cameras to capture Adana, standing with Sumin in her arms. For 3 years, while I was building a company, she was building a child. She was the one who taught her to laugh, who held her when she was afraid, who showed her that love is an action, not a transaction. And when my daughter called her Eomma at the gala, I was not embarrassed by the word. I was threatened by the truth it revealed, that I had been absent and someone else had shown up. He paused, letting the admission hang in the air. The room was silent, the reporters' pens frozen. So I did what a man who is used to controlling things does. I tried to fire the truth. I tried to pay it to go away. I endangered Ms. Oak's legal status, and in doing so, I endangered my own daughter's health. For that, I am deeply and permanently sorry. He then turned to Mrs. Lee, Sumin's biological grandmother, and bowed deeply, a gesture that sent a shockwave through the Korean press corps. And to Mrs. Lee, I apologize for the closed nature of the adoption that kept you from your granddaughter. From today, you will be a welcomed part of her life, for as long as you wish to be. He then addressed the corporate allegations. The reports about Kang Ventures' treatment of foreign workers are being investigated independently. I have stepped back from operational control to ensure that investigation is unfettered. If the practices are as described, they will be rooted out and made right, regardless of cost. Finally, he delivered the line that would headline every news report. Family is not a matter of biology or paperwork or social convenience. It is a matter of the heart. Sumin has 2 mothers, one who gave her life and one who showed her how to live it. And she has a father who is finally, humbly, learning how to be one. He stepped back. The room remained silent for a beat, then erupted in shouted questions. But June didn't answer them. He simply walked back to Adana, took his daughter from her arms, and stood with the 2 women and Mrs. Lee as the cameras flashed. A new, messy, public family portrait. The fallout was immediate and seismic. The board's vote to oust him proceeded, but without his controlling shares, it was a symbolic gesture. More importantly, the public and employee sentiment had turned. The stock, after an initial dip, stabilized and then began to climb. The narrative had shifted from scandal to redemption. The whistleblower from HR was hailed as a hero, and June's pledge to reform the company's practices was met with cautious optimism. Legally, the path cleared. Immigration, under the glare of public scrutiny, and with June's full backing, fast-tracked Adana's application for permanent residency on humanitarian and compassionate grounds, citing her role as a psychological parent. The petition in her support swelled to over 200,000 names. But the true resolution was lived in the quiet of the estate. A new rhythm was established. Adana's contract was formalized, Director of Family Well-Being, a title she chose with a wry smile. Her afternoons were still spent in the garden with Sumin, but now June joined them sometimes, awkwardly at first, learning the names of plants. Mrs. Lee visited every Sunday, bringing traditional snacks and speaking to Sumin in Korean, slowly weaving in the cultural threads that had been absent. The relationship between June and Adana evolved into a strained but respectful partnership, bound by their shared love for the child. There was no romantic epiphany, no easy Hollywood ending. Instead, there was the hard, daily work of building trust. They attended family therapy together. They argued about screen time and bedtimes. They were, in every functional sense, co-parents. Then came the final, surprising detail. 6 months after the press conference, June was reviewing the independent audit's final report on the company's visa practices. Buried in the annex was a finding unrelated to labor, a note from the forensic accountants. They had traced a series of irregular charitable donations made by the company's foundation over the past decade. One consistent recipient was the very adoption agency in Seoul through which June had adopted Soo Min. The donations were not large, but they were structured as expediting fees. The report suggested, without outright stating, that June's wealth and status may have unintentionally incentivized the agency to fast-track his application and tighten the closure of the adoption, indirectly contributing to Mrs. Lee's isolation. June brought the finding to Adana and Mrs. Lee. He was braced for a new wave of anger. Instead, Mrs. Lee sighed, a sound of profound weariness. "I always knew money was a wall," she said. "I just didn't know every brick had a name on it." Rather than sparking new litigation, the revelation led to a joint decision. June, Adana, and Mrs. Lee established a new foundation, named after Soo Min, with a clear mandate: to support open adoptions, provide post-adoption family mediation, and fund cultural connection programs for transracial adoptees. Its first major project was funding a community center in Incheon, near Mrs. Lee's home. The foundation's launch event was held in the estate's garden, now partially redesigned by Adana to include a Korean wildflower meadow and a Nigerian conversation circle of native shrubs. Soo Min, now 6, stood between her father and Adana, holding both their hands as the cameras clicked. She was no longer a silent secret or a scandalous headline. She was a bridge. Later that evening, after the guests had left, June found Adana in the kitchen. She was making jollof rice, the smell of Scotch bonnets and thyme filling the air. Soo Min was already asleep, exhausted from the day. "She called me Appa today," June said quietly, without prompting. Adana nodded, stirring the pot. "She's starting to believe you'll stay, too." There was a long silence, filled only by the sound of simmering. Then June spoke again. "I don't know how to thank you for staying, for forcing me to see." Adana turned off the stove and looked at him. "You don't thank me, you just keep doing the work. Every day, that's how you thank her." She meant Soo Min. He understood. The grand gestures were over. The press conferences, the legal battles, the public apologies, they were the explosive birth of this new reality. Now came the quiet, endless work of living it. He picked up a spoon. "Can I try it?" Adana raised an eyebrow. "The jollof, it's spicy." "I'm learning," he said and took a bite. It was indeed spicy, complex, and utterly unlike anything in his old world. He coughed, then smiled, a real, unguarded smile. "It's good." From the doorway, a small voice piped up. "I want some too." Soo Min stood there in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. She padded over to Adana, who lifted her onto a stool, and then to June's surprise, the child leaned her head against his arm. He went very still, as if afraid to breathe and break the spell. Adana served 3 bowls. They ate together at the kitchen island, a billionaire, a gardener, and a child who belonged to them both. No one spoke. The only sound was the clink of spoons and the hum of the refrigerator. It was not a moment for headlines. It was an ordinary, miraculous moment of a family, however unconventional, finally at peace. Outside, the garden slept under the moon, the new shoots of the Nigerian shrubs and the Korean wildflowers taking root in the same soil, ready for whatever came next. The war was over. The work had just begun. So what is the true legacy of that single word, shouted in a silent ballroom? It's not a corporate scandal, or a viral news cycle, or even a billionaire's redemption. It's a 6-year-old girl who now knows in her bones that love is a force powerful enough to dismantle walls. Walls of money, of tradition, of expectation. Her family is a living question mark, a challenge to every easy definition we hold. This story exists at the violent intersection of 3 monolithic systems. The global adoption industry, which can prioritize efficiency over connection. The corporate immigration machine, which treats human beings as disposable labor. And the unspoken social codes of elite society, which value appearance above authenticity. Soo Min, Adana, and June lived in the crack between those systems. And in that crack, they grew something new. For the over 200,000 Korean adoptees sent around the world, and the millions in transracial families, this narrative echoes a fundamental dilemma. Where does belonging come from? Is it in the soil of your birth, or in the hands that hold you? Adana did what the research says matters most. She provided active cultural socialization. She didn't just feed a child, she gave her a cultural compass, a patchwork of Igbo stories and Nigerian flowers alongside her Korean heritage. She built a bridge, not a wall. June's journey was a brutal unlearning, from seeing family as an asset to be acquired to understanding it as a fragile ecosystem to be tended. His power did not save his daughter, his humility did. His wealth did not build her a family, his willingness to surrender his ego did. And Adana, she represents the quiet, monumental strength of those who mother without title, who care without credit. She fought not with lawyers first, but with steadfast presence. Her victory was not a paycheck or a visa. It was the right to continue loving a child who saw her soul. The lingering question is not about them, but about us. How many of these invisible families exist in the shadows of our own communities? The nanny who is a child's first confidant. The caregiver who knows an elder's stories better than their own children. We have built a world that financially incentivizes care work while socially diminishing the carers, until a moment of crisis blows the facade apart. This story is a case study in what happens when the heart refuses to obey the contract. It argues that the strongest bonds are often forged outside the lines we draw, lines of race, class, and biology. It suggests that family is less a noun you are and more a verb you do. It is the showing up, the braiding of hair, the making of jollof rice on a Tuesday, the learning to be gentle with a fragile, growing thing. Sumin Kang will grow up with a complex map of love. She will navigate the world with the gift of multiple languages, multiple cultures, and multiple mothers. She will carry within her the proof that we are not limited to one story, that we can be woven from many threads, and that the resulting fabric can be stronger, more beautiful, and more true than any single strand could ever be. The garden at the Kang estate is still there. The Nigerian alamanda and the Korean azaleas now grow side by side, their roots entangled beneath the surface, sharing the same soil, drawing strength from the same rain. It is a living metaphor tended daily, a reminder that some things, the most important things, cannot be ordered, controlled, or bought. They can only be planted, protected, and given the light to grow. What is family? Perhaps it is simply the people you choose to become responsible for, and who choose, against all odds, to become responsible for you. If you found a new perspective in this story, if it challenged a definition you held, consider subscribing. More stories like this are waiting to be told. Thanks for watching.